a joy to be joining you at Not Optional. My name is Caroline Hyde. I have the great pleasure of being an anchor for Bloomberg Television right here in very grey New York. But today we have got a fireside chat for you. So I know the fires are roaring across in Estonia. Next with, of course, Taavet Hinrikus joins us, co-founder, chairman now of TransferWise. And also to join us in this free-flowing conversation that I know it will be, John Collison, of course, co-founder of Stripe, who's currently in Europe as well, I think, especially for this sort of an event. But I want this to be fast-flowing, free-talking, enjoyable, and really putting to bear what we are wondering about, where Europe is at in terms of its tech infrastructure, its tech investment, and its tech talent. And kudos to Slush and to Index Ventures for putting this event on. And let's get straight to it, because, gentlemen, it is a joy to be joined by both of you. And Taavet, kick us off, if you will, because we all spend our times trying to compare how Europe is compared to Silicon Valley. How is it doing versus China? From your perspective, you've been in the game for a while, having built your business from scratch and now billions in terms of valuation. What does Europe look like to you as an angel investor and as a founder?
I think Europe is doing awesome right now. So if I think back when we started TransferWise almost 10 years ago, it was way, way different. We actually went to US to raise our money. We raised seed A, B, C from US. We actually got our D round and later from Europe. If you think about talent, if you think about infrastructure, a lot has changed. So I think we're in a golden age of Europe. The capital is available. We have more raw talent in Europe than we have in the US. Also, I think people's attitudes are finally changing. It used to be that when you fail as a founder in Europe, some people look at it like, "Ooh, this kind of stinks. This guy failed." I think we're starting to embrace failure a little bit more. So, it's just a matter of time until we're really going to catch up to US and China, in my mind.
John, does Silicon Valley care? You're a European who left for the US to start raising your money for founding Stripe. Does Silicon Valley care about how big Europe is?
I think Europe cares too much what Silicon Valley thinks. I think that there tends to be a lot of talking about catching up to the US and China and various things like that. But as Taavet said, the fundamentals are fabulous in that, you have, as a block, Europe has the largest density of software engineering talent. We know there's a really strong base of hard tech investment. I mean, we look at the progress here on the Oxford COVID vaccine and lots of other things as we look at, AI. It's where Facebook's, AI headquarters in Paris and things like that. But I think fundamentally we kind of look at it from the wrong perspective with too much comparison. Like, yes, obviously it's the case that it's gotten so much better. I grew up in Ireland and then, first moved to the United States in, 2009. In 2009, when I left the US, it was a barren wasteland of a fundraising environment. I mean, the notion that you could scrape together a Series A from, a small handful of investors and maybe government grants or something, that was an achievement. And now you have, like Taavet said, there Series D and Series E from European investors and these very large investment rounds without really anyone batting an eye. And so what I get excited about are all the specific areas where I think European startups are best set up to compete and to win on a global basis, and we can get into some of those.
Yeah, I mean, delve into that, John, because fintech was always what was held up and lauded as the area of expertise. London is the hub of that, but you've built your fintech in Silicon Valley. Like, where is the opportunities in particular with Europe, do you think?
Well, we haven't in that we obviously got our start in the United States. We're in college for it there, but now our international headquarters is in Dublin. We have a large business in Europe. We actually just announced the acquisition of a company called Paystack last week. They are headquartered in Nigeria and they are building the Stripe for Africa. And I actually think expanding to African countries is one of the very big opportunities that European companies have available to them. As you mentioned, fintech, I think that's a big one. Actually, Taavet, I'd be curious for your thoughts on this. But I think it's really interesting to contrast the difference in the American mindset towards enabling all this stuff versus the European mindset, where Americans have a bit of this view. There's the famous Ronald Reagan line that the 9 scariest words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," and you can kind of see that in not much happens in the way of enabling frameworks and standards and technology. Whereas I think in the European landscape, you tend to get much more in the way of active regulators looking to enable markets developing. And so with fintech, it isn't that fintech just accidentally sprung up in Europe. You had the notion of passporting, where you can get licensed in one countries and then passport it to other European countries, which is something both Stripe and TransferWise take advantage of. You've all the developments with PSD2, you've the banking regulatory sandboxes and things like this. But there's lots of active work that made things like Stripe and TransferWise possible from a framework perspective. And I get excited about there are probably future areas where we should be applying that thinking. Look at VAT, which is a mess right now. Look at digital identity, where we need much more to be improved. And so that would be probably one example. I would say, there is an approach that brought fintech about, and we can probably take that approach and apply it to other areas.
Taavet, your thoughts?
I mean, I think, John, you said a lot of this already. I would just maybe start also from actually, if you're building a global business, which, both of our companies are global, we have more than a dozen offices around the world, it's actually a whole lot easier to manage that from Europe. There's a reason you're camping out in Europe right now. It's just easier. Let's be honest about it. Time zone wise, you can call California and you can call Singapore in the same day. Try doing it from one of these places. So it's just, logistically much easier. But, we've gotten a lot right for fintech regulation. I mean, in the US, for many things, you have state-by-state regulation. In Europe, it's an equal sized opportunity. I say we're talking 500 million people in both, well, a bit less, but, in Europe, you have one regulator. It's no accident that we chose UK to be our headquarters, because the UK regulator already back then was showing signs of promise. And I still think FCA is keeping the leading spot as a regulator, and the way passporting works. So the way European Union is making a digital single market, I think there's a lot more to be done, but they're actively trying to create an environment. They have made it a much more level playing field. If you look at, we were the first non-bank to get access to the payments infrastructure in the UK. We still haven't gotten everywhere in Europe, and there's more that a regulator should do. But I think there's a lot happening, and the world is also paying attention and copying a lot what's been done in the UK. So many regulators are saying that, hey, the FCA is our model, and we're trying to copy that. And, I think fintech and everything around it, fintech, insurance, and so on. Also, if you think of companies, we have Stripe, and, we have another similar company in Europe called Adyen. I don't even know which one is bigger. So I think Europe is ahead in fintech and everything around this. I think much more to come in various deep tech areas, whether it goes to health-related fields or climate, just the raw engineering talent coming from universities that will build a lot of exciting things.
Stripe is bigger in case you're wondering, yeah. But do you think there's also something, Taavet, where getting, companies that get their start in the US, you can live there and drive for 1,000 kilometers in any direction, and you're still in, exactly the same kind of culture, from which you started, more or less. Whereas pretty early on, you have companies that grew up in the European environment working on cross-border, working on multi-currency, multi-language, working on localizing their products. And so I think you tend to see more of these globally minded companies, even at the Series A stage.
I totally agree. It's a mixed blessing. If you start a company in Europe, you end up, you might be lucky starting it in UK, which means you can grow this far. You might be unlucky starting in Estonia, which means you can only grow this far until you have to go elsewhere. If you start in the US, you have a huge market to go after, but that means you end up building a large business, a large organization that really can't think of languages, even time zones might be a challenge. Versus in Europe, you get a kick in the butt very quickly and you have to go outside. So I do think it is a structural advantage for us. And I think the European companies have become pretty good at figuring out their playbooks on this. And at the same time, we can see US companies, I think the last example was Robinhood, that figured Europe is too hard and we'll go back to US. So great. I'm sure there's going to be a dozen baby Robin Hoods coming up in Europe soon.
Is Europe, though, Taavet, making its life more difficult with Brexit? Is it making your life more difficult? Do you think that the regulators will be as seamless? Or is it affecting things?
Favorite topic: elections and Brexit.
And the virus.
Let me talk about elections next, please. So Brexit, it's obviously it's a huge issue for one country, and a bit more of an issue for one union. I think in the tech world, actually, I would say, if you look at Europe, it doesn't matter. It matters for UK and makes life harder in the UK, but Europe as a whole, London loses, Paris wins. I think, I believe we're living in a post-Silicon Valley world. We have many Silicon Valleys in Europe, London being one, Paris, Berlin, Tallinn. Like in Estonia, we have 5 unicorns for 1 million people. I mean, bloody hell, that's like, everyone has a personal unicorn soon. So I think, we're going to have many more tech capitals in Europe, which is good. Brexit will make things harder, and it'll make things more harder for London and UK. But I think overall, we're going to move on. And, so people in tech are good at building. And if you're building, then, you just tend to overcome whatever gets thrown in the way.
And I can hardly keep up with your building, both of you. And talk to us about Stripe and the way it's evolving. I mean, you're now helping businesses have their own credit cards. You've been making purchases over in Africa, as you say, John. Your perspective on what policy barriers you're finding as you move into new regions such as Africa, as you're looking at expanding these new types of offerings. What more could Europe do potentially from a policy barrier perspective? Does anything need to get down?
Oh, absolutely. And it actually gets to the Brexit point, right? Where I think you could live too much in conceptual space and imagine that like we had this neat, orderly EU where everything was colored in on a map before, and then the UK exited it, and now everything is really hard and non-standardized. And look, there are kind of real, social, personal, business costs to Brexit, but we shouldn't kid ourselves about how standardized everything was before and how standardized everything is within the EU right now. And so, we talk a lot about the European single digital market. That is more of a conceptual aspiration than a reality. Cross-border commerce within the EU borders is still sub 20%, which seems kind of bonkers when you think that we should have solved all the barriers to intra-EU trade right now. And so just within our small parochial doing business online corner of things, absolutely standardizing across payment methods. SEPA was a good start for bank transfers. But one of the big things people come to Stripe to do is to make it so that they can accept any European payment methods. That's what we're doing. We would love to see more standardization across sales tax, making it easy for a business to operate and to sell to any other business in Europe. Like I mentioned, we'd love to see more standardization across digital identity. The fact that both Taavet and I in our businesses, you need to do KYC checks or validate someone's identity for them to participate in the internet economy. There is no good online way to do that right now. And so I think that's rightly something that regulators and various businesses are looking at. But again, with Brexit, it's not like we went from a world where everything was perfectly standardized within the EU to now that's falling over. I think we actually still have a lot of, even just within EU countries, standardization to do. And that then applies as we go kind of further afield to regions like, expanding into Africa with Paystack, or we've lots of other international expansion happening. It's that same set of challenges that you need to do, where Stripe is fundamentally about providing a ubiquity and translation layer where everything works smoothly, but everything is different underneath the hood. And so we need to do the work to enable that.
Taavet, any policy wishes? You had your perspective?
I mean, first, John, if you mentioned ID verification, I think the leading ID verification companies are all in Europe. So, ping me later and I can put you in touch. I think when it comes to policy, lots is right, but there's still more to do. I think, the prime thing that I would think about is really making it a level playing field in Europe when it comes to banks and fintechs. There's a lot about access to payment infrastructure, which is still limited to banks only. I mentioned how we got access in the UK, but that took us about 7 years of lobbying and then 2 years of building. Great thing is that now everyone else has an easier way, and we're very happy to pave the way in other countries. But that's something where regulators could really come in and help. Digital single market is exists, but lots more to do. I mean, maybe I would add here labor, making the labor market more unified. Hiring, firing people is still very complicated in some countries, easier in others. Also the topic of stock options. Sadly, if you have people in every European country, that means it's a big mess because every country treats it differently from a tax point of view. So more to be done, to make it a more single market. But we have the beginnings in place.
Beautiful segue there, Taavet, because of course this is basically what Not Optional is all about. They've already put out an open letter to Europe saying stock options is one area you could help us in terms of the fight for talent. I mean, over at Stripe, John, I'm seeing you pinch high-level executives from all over the place. You just got your CFO from GM, you've been hiring from Salesforce to head up the UK. But your perspective on tech talent in Europe, we heard from Taavet saying like the tech talent is actually deeper perhaps in Europe. Do you agree? Do you feel that anything could be made easier to ensure that you can continue to build?
I think Taavet's getting at the right issues. Look, one is stock options are something we should be highly encouraging of, in that they allow, in the case where people are building these large, valuable franchises, they allow that wealth that's created to be more dispersed, to be kind of more broadly owned, which I think is just straight up good from a policy perspective, and then instrumentally helps kickstart ecosystems. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of study about the fact that Silicon Valley, so many startups get funded because there are so many people out there as angel investors from previous companies, who write those checks, and you can kind of trace them.
Boom! I see from you. I see Retool. I see. You're busy in angel investing.
No, exactly. But and as you trace back the history of Silicon Valley, you see that Google begat by the generation of companies that came before it, and so I think we should clearly hope for that. I think another clear example is that, look, I don't think anyone holds up the United States right now as a paragon of a model of the right thing to do from an immigration point of view, and just like a smooth, well-run, orderly immigration apparatus. But fundamentally, people are building global companies and looking to attack. They're competing in global talent markets, and so I think the one question is how we make intra-EU mobility better, and how Brexit affects that, and things like that. But we are, for our again, Ireland is our international headquarters, and so we tend to be hiring people from all around the world to Ireland, and so I think in the competition for talent, making these places attractive, and just from a visas and systems point of view, making it easy for people to build global headquarters, that is what companies are looking to do, and I think that's what we need to enable.
John, does the virus change things, do you think? Will people need to move?
I mean, it'd be very odd if it didn't change things somewhat, but we're obviously working in a very different mode right now with COVID, and like a lot of companies, we have moved to a fully remote model, and we expect that to continue until the kind of the facts on the ground around a vaccine distribution, or at least testing, enable us to do something differently. We were in a slightly different point coming into COVID because we already had a very international presence. We're not just all based in our, in San Francisco or anything like that. And we actually had lots of remote people already. But I would say, we will have the real decisions around kind of if there are long-term changes we want to keep from the current mode a little bit more in 2021, when we have line of sight to what that looks like.
Taavet, how about you in terms of, do you think in any way the silver lining of this dark cloud that is COVID, that it levels the playing field, that you can be an engineer based in Estonia and Latvia and in Nigeria and come and work for TransferWise as easily and not have to move to London?
So I do love the idea how COVID shrunk the world, did a lot of positive changes in that sense. And I've been really amazed at seeing how the world has coped with it. Starting March and April, we were all kind of sent home, and you would have guessed that the world is going to stop and fall off a cliff. But guess what? Things kept on going. So I was like, oh wow, this is like pretty cool. Like we can actually do this. But now I've been super amazed at the last couple of months where on a couple of projects we've gotten actually people in a room to brainstorm and figure stuff out, and wow. That's really amazing. It still seems to me that magic happens when you put people in the same room around one pizza box and get them to figure stuff out. So I think we're going to go into some kind of new world where we're not expected to sit in the office 5 days a week. But I also don't believe in no offices at all. I mean, there are companies that make it work that have a fully remote culture, but I think that will always be a minority. So I think most of the world will end up somewhere in the middle. So at TransferWise, we made a couple decisions now, which is one, first 3 days at home is very okay for everyone to do. But also I think the even maybe more exciting one is we've told everyone can spend 90 days a year working from anywhere they want. So if you want to go and camp out in Bali for 90 days and work from there, you're welcome to do that. So we'll see what the new normal is. It's probably early now to fully predict where we end up and when we end up there at all.
One thing that from our perspective, one thing that I think is really useful is just honestly teaches a large fraction of the company who, how to work remotely. Going into COVID, we were 20% remote, 80% in offices around the world. I think coming out of that, not only will we be a higher percentage remote, and we've had some people who have decided to move to be remote workers during it, but the other 80% or whatever it ends up being, now actually just understand instrumentally much better how to work within a remote culture. I think that is a very useful set of lessons that hopefully we're not going to forget, 12 months after things being somewhat back to normal.
There's a lot about the tooling, starting with should remote people be paid the lowest salary or the highest salary in the company? There's also we're using this fantastic thing called Zoom. I would be very surprised if in a couple years time, we don't have something better. I mean, it could still be from the company called Zoom, but I think, this is still very similar to when we invented video calling in Skype in 2004. So I think we'll see much better tooling and ways of working, which are more suited for this new age.
Taavet, you started over at Skype, so if anyone knows the way video conferencing is going to go, you're a man who will know it. Talk to me about competition. And I mean, John, I feel like that was the ongoing thing as well. Not only was the cliche that we worry about valuations of Europe versus US and China, but we're also worried about does Europe inherently hate US tech giants in the way that we see the European Competition Commission really go after it? But what do you think about the way in which Europe looks at competition, fosters competition, and is it different from the United States, do you think, John?
Look, I mean, does Europe look at competition from a regulatory perspective differently? Yes, in that, the European competition framework versus the US antitrust framework, the former is, based on market share. The latter in America, they tend to look at consumer harm. And, this is the debates that are going on in America right now with something like Amazon, where it's like, well, it seems really good for consumers. So, where do you poke at it? But I also think that most businesses are actually not like the headline grabbing, giant market share, FANG, GAFA monoliths that people talk about, where, we would love if at Stripe, our main problem was that there just wasn't competition. But, luckily for consumers, we are not anywhere near that point. Instead, it's, a very active space where any region we go into, we have a whole bunch of competitors. And that's part of the fun of it, honestly, right? Where you're constantly being, businesses choosing Stripe or a competitor in our world, have options that are only a click away. And I think that's, part of the fun and the sport of it. And I've loved watching similarly with Taavet and with TransferWise, where, clearly it is a space that was bereft of competition for a long time. And they've just, they're clearly having a lot of fun, just, poking in the eye the, somewhat lazy, entrants that needed some competition. But again, I think the arrival of TransferWise was much more effective from a competition point of view than hauling people in front of commissions would have been. I think that was clearly the recipe that was needed.
Yeah, Taavet, we miss the adverts. We need some more coming out.
Yeah, can you bring back the ads, Taavet?
Well, we keep on thinking about what clothes should we be ripping off next.
How much more naked can you get? Talk to us, Taavet, about, you're a very active angel investor, having become chairman over at TransferWise. I see you're in Radix, you're in couples counseling business. I think it's called Paired, you're in Catalog. There's so many areas you're looking at. What really excites you about some of the companies that are being born in Europe right now? Because it seems to be Europe that you're investing in.
Yeah, I think, you got to cut your focus somehow. So I tend to I tend to try to look at European things. And, truth be told, it's really a question about looking at what are the huge opportunities. You mentioned Get Peers, a couple counseling app. This is a very somewhat of a taboo topic. Actually, probably a cultural difference between US and in US couple therapy is a much more accepted thing compared to Europe. So, it's a huge problem impacting a lot of people out there. So hey, there is no tool. Let's try to build one. And Kevin was a great guy to go at it. So let's give him a try and let's help him. And similarly, so many other things where you actually see digitalization hasn't quite happened yet. When we talk about competition, actually, I think most of the competition is still about the new way of doing things, which is online, and the old way of doing things, which is offline. Even you look at Amazon, what's the share of e-commerce at Amazon? What's e-commerce's share of commerce? It's tiny. So, we are talking about helping the world get onto a digital track. And, that's actually a much more inclusive, much more level playing field for all consumers anywhere around the world.
And certainly that's another silver lining from this COVID is the shift that we've seen to e-commerce and hopefully that level playing field. John, I knew this time would fly away, and it has, because you're both so fun and amusing, but thoughtful. Talk to us, John, about what you'd say to the entrepreneurs out there right now, because that's what Not Optional is about. It's about helping entrepreneurs get onto the next level. It's about helping with policy making. What do you say to the entrepreneurs who are hoping to build a Stripe?
No, I think the main thing is that Stripe was kind of an obvious business to start when you think about it. If you just look at the space. But I think everyone had been trained to think, oh, well, payments must be broken because, there's some need for it. Again, same with the TransferWise example, this must just be so expensive because that's how things work and it just can't be fixed. There's the joke about The Economist, their way of looking at the world where, they're walking down the street and they see a $20 bill, but they don't bend down to pick it up off the sidewalk. It's that can't be real. My eyes must be fooling me, because if it was real, someone would have picked it up by now. But, it's this notion that, the world is perfectly efficient. And I think that's the lesson for entrepreneurs. You have to train yourself to stop taking for granted and stop assuming that the adults are running the show, stop assuming that everything works the way it does for a good reason, and look out at all the, wide open opportunities there. And, we've touched on some of the, the areas that I think could be particularly interesting, fintech or areas enabled by some of these new European frameworks that either exist or are in development. Taavet talks about things that are newly enabled, by the internet, like couples therapy. One I'm really excited about is climate tech. I think, we just had our announcement of Stripe Climate yesterday, where we're letting businesses fund carbon removal from right within their Stripe account with kind of a percentage of sales. But that's a brand new space being invested in much more heavily in Europe than in the US, and one where I think we could see tons of entrepreneurs. But that will be the main one. I would encourage entrepreneurs to the mindset I would encourage them to have is stop assuming everything works the way it does for a reason.
I think if anything, every single economist has eaten a huge dose of humble pie in the last couple of quarters. So yeah, I hear that. And Taavet, your perspective, any one piece of advice going out of this that you'd say to a young startup entrepreneur?
I think an old dog can't learn new tricks. So I kind of end up thinking back of the things which really helped us make things work at TransferWise. It goes back to find a huge problem, find something where you have room to build a global business and help people around the world, and then build a 10 times better solution. Similar to what John says, take nothing for granted. If I think about what people told me when starting Transfer, oh, this won't work because of this and this and this and this and this. We've proven that none of these things matter. So, but I think the basics are a 10x better solution for a huge problem, and then go give it a try. You have to be ready to learn quickly, but then it's going to be a very fun ride.
Think big. I think that's the takeaway. Guys, I want to thank you both so much, giving us half an hour of your time, more than that, from your various outposts in Ireland and in Estonia. We wish you both keep happy, healthy, and enjoy your stints over in Europe and when you come traveling back to the UK. And I want to thank all those in the audience. I want to thank the organizers, of course. Big shout out to Wojtek there. And I'm going to hand things over to Anna from Slush now to wind things up.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you to John and Taavet. So hi, everyone. My name is Anna Briski, and I'm leading communication and PR at Slush. And as many of you know, Slush is a not-for-profit student-led movement born out of the cold and slushy Helsinki, Finland. And for the past 10 years or so, our mission has been to support and grow these world-changing startups. And that's because we think startups are the best way to build the future. And we think those startups can be also built in Europe. And while Europe has already seen so many success stories like Stripe and TransferWise, there is a lot to bubbling under. And to make those stories true, those success stories true, we need to focus on enabling these companies to grow in Europe. And that's why we're here today. And based on today's discussions, I think we're heading to the right direction. Today we heard of Germany unveiling their new stock option plan in the matter of days. And also EU startup nation standard is rolling out in the beginning of next year. And we at Slush are more than excited to see where these discussions from today lead. And we are more than happy to be part of that work. So thank you everyone who joined today, especially our speakers such as Eva Kali, Liz McCarthy, Jeddah de Graaf, and of course Taavet and John. We also loved seeing you, our audience, sharing your thoughts and ideas in the chat and on social media, and we hope this energy continues tomorrow. Speaking of tomorrow, we're having the most exciting program. First, we'll dive deeper into European IPOs, and then talk about the government's role in investments. And of course, the day will end with a look ahead of Portuguese presidency. So tune in tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. CET to catch the highlights of today, and 10:55 a.m. CET to hear Sifted's very own journalist Michael Stodhart's opening words. That's a wrap of today, and I thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you tomorrow.